So I want to start by saying thank you everyone for joining. My name is Cody Armstrong, and today we're talking about the essentials of Onshape. So this webinar is really intended for those that are just getting started with Onshape. Maybe you're new to CAD or just new to Onshape, and you kind of want to learn the fundamentals to get started. What are the necessary pieces of information that you need to get started? Really intended for those, again, that are just starting with Onshape. So if you have a lot of experience, weeks, months using Onshape, this may not necessarily be the best webinar for you. We have lots of other webinars recorded, so if you do a search for Onshape webinars, you'll find a library of past webinars we've done. But this one's really intended for those that are just getting started and are trying to understand the essentials. All right, so let's get into it. Now, before I get into the topic of the day, there are always a few things I like to mention to those new users out there. So if you're new to Onshape, the first thing I always like to mention is our mission statement with Onshape, and that is getting everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. This includes mobile devices. So if you're new to Onshape, you haven't downloaded the Onshape app, I definitely recommend it. On iOS and Android, there's a mobile app that's a full-blown CAD editing tool. You can create sketches, features, parts, assemblies from your phone, from your tablet. But it's more than just mobile. You have accessibility from anywhere. Windows, Mac, Linux, Chromebooks. It doesn't really matter what the computer is. You can access your Onshape data anywhere. So again, our mission with Onshape, everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. Now, the other thing I always like to mention is, of course, Onshape is professional 3D CAD, and generally when people think of professional 3D CAD, they think of parts and assemblies and drawings. And we do have parts, assemblies, and drawings, of course. We have a lot of things that aren't included in other professional 3D CAD systems. One of the first that I always like to mention is just the difference in the frequent updates. In Onshape, we have roughly every 3 weeks new features being added. In other CAD systems, you may get an update once a year, right? So frequent updates, roughly every 3 weeks, you're going to see new features being added. And the really unique thing about it is, again, because Onshape is cloud-based, it runs in the browser, you don't have to do anything. No downloads, no installs, no updates. None of that is necessary. So frequent updates, definitely something that makes us very unique. The next thing I like to mention is built-in version control. This is something that, again, in other professional 3D CAD systems, you have to have some kind of separate software to manage. It's often referred to as PDM systems, where you have a separate software meant to manage versions of files, manage files, essentially. And that's not necessary in Onshape. We have that capability built into the core functionality. It's not an afterthought. It's not something that has to be managed, purchased separately. The next thing I want to mention is we have the ability to read and write common CAD formats. So if you've come from another CAD system, or if you have a library of CAD data in another format, chances are we can work with it. Step IGES Parasol, the neutral formats, but even native formats, SolidWorks, Inventor, Creo, CATIA, STL, OBJ, DXF, DWG. So chances are, if you have a library of CAD data, we can work with it. We can also export to a lot of common CAD formats as well. It means Onshape works really well alongside other CAD systems, or as a tool that you might use maybe in the shop floor or something along those lines, where you need that ability to work with other CAD systems, different formats. The next thing I want to mention, and this is an important one, especially to what we're talking about here today, is one of the really unique things that Onshape has done is really brought entirely new methods of collaboration. So if you haven't shared a document yet, there's a big share icon in the top right corner. Definitely give it a shot. Try sharing with someone. All you need is their email address and defining their permissions. It's very easy to do. They don't have to download or install anything. And the neat thing about it is you can work on the same model at the same time. So you're not sending files back and forth. If you want to work with someone else, you work on the same model at the same time. If they make a change, you instantly see it update. So real-time collaboration between multiple users. So again, entirely new methods of collaboration, real-time collaboration on the model, things like integrated comments, follow mode. There's a lot of built-in tools that make collaboration really unique in Onshape. The last thing I'm going to mention is custom features with feature script. So in Onshape, we have a programming language called feature script, and it's essentially a custom-built language that allows you to create a custom CAD feature. And so if you've ever had a scenario where I wish there was a certain button that did these steps that I always find myself doing, or I wish there was a certain command that made this easier for myself, chances are you can build it. You can create your own. So definitely worth it if you're at all interested in writing code. You can create your own CAD feature. And the really unique thing about it is it behaves, it looks just like Onshape's features. So custom features with feature script, one of the last things I wanted to mention here today about Onshape. Now, what is the goal today? It's pretty straightforward. As I mentioned before, this is very much a entry-level crash course into Onshape. So, of course, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the interface. What are the important pieces of the interface that you need to know getting started? Then we're going to build a simple part, assemble it, and create a drawing of it. Okay, so we have a lot of stuff to go through, and we're going to go through at a very high level. Of course, you can't learn everything in an hour, but it's definitely a good place to start. Now, I also want to show how to import, although it's very simple. You'll see it's just an option in your browse. But for those getting started, that's a commonly asked question, so I will show you how to import. And then I'm going to answer any questions that you'd like. So feel free to ask questions. There's a questions section of that GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to ask any question, and I'll do my best to stop and answer the questions as we go through things. All right, so let's get started. Now, one last slide that I have for you before we jump into Onshape itself, and it's just 5 key takeaways. If you had to take away 5 things from this webinar, these are the 5 things I would have you remember. First, Onshape runs in a browser, and that's a key thing because one of the more common questions we get is, how do I download Onshape? You don't. You log in through a browser. Chrome, Opera, Firefox, Safari. You want to avoid Internet Explorer and Edge. So use Chrome, Opera, Firefox, Safari, whichever browser you prefer. But again, no downloading Onshape. You just log in through the browser. So that's the first thing. Onshape itself runs in the browser. The second thing to keep in mind, and it's one of the more confusing things new users stumble on, is the idea of a document. In Onshape, a single document is like a project container. You can think of it as that top-level folder you may have used in the past, where inside of that folder you may have all kinds of sub-assemblies and all kinds of parts and drawings. Think of a document that way. A single document can have dozens of sub-assemblies and assemblies and parts and drawings, really anything that you want. You can store as much as you want in a single document. Right? So think of a document as that project level container. It's going to hold all your parts, all your assemblies, all your drawings, everything related to that project. Okay? And I think the common misconception from new users is a document equals a single model. That's not the case. You can have as much in your document as you'd like. And that ties into the next thing to remember, and that is in the document, you have different tabs. So when we jump into a document in a moment, you're going to see different tabs across the bottom of the interface. That's how you access the various pieces of the document, the parts, the assemblies, the drawings, and so on. So again, keep in mind, a document can hold as much as you want, and you access all the pieces of the document via the tabs across the bottom. Now, the last thing I want to mention is the last 2 things I want to mention. Sharing and collaboration are built in, and data management is built in. And again, these are in other professional 3D CAD systems. You would have to install a separate software for sharing. You would have to install a separate software for data management. So these are things that we feel are important enough to build into the core functionality of Onshape. So let's jump into things. Enough slides. All right, so as I mentioned before, one of the important things that I want to start off with is, of course, Onshape itself runs in the browser. You can see I'm using Chrome. You could use Opera, Firefox, Safari. It's entirely up to you. Again, you'll want to avoid Internet Explorer or Edge. But other than that, it's really your choice of browser. And when you first log in, of course, you're going to create your account. You first log in. You're going to log into cad.onshape.com. It will ask you for your username and password, of course. And then you'll be taken to the Documents page. Now, the Documents page is just simply a list of your documents. So as I mentioned before, think of that document as a project level container. This is a list of all your project level containers, right? So all the various projects that I've been working on, you will see in this list of documents. So again, this is the first thing that you'll see when you log in, the Documents page, and it's really just a list of your different documents. There are a few important pieces of the interface that I want to go into here, and then we're going to jump into a document. So starting in the top left, I mentioned before, I wanted to show you how to import. It's a very simple option under Create. You'll see Import Files. You can import a single file or multiple files at once. Any of the formats that I mentioned, if you want to do a search in our help, you'll find a list of all the formats that we support. But definitely very simple to use, right? So under the Create, you're going to see Import. Just simply browse to the file or files that you want to import, and import them into a document. Now, of course, just above that is the option to create a new document. So if you're looking to create geometry, not import, but create it, this is where you'll do it. You'll see create document. That'll give you a new blank document to start working. Now, the create, of course, is a very important icon, probably the most important on the documents page, but there are a few important filters that will get more important as you start creating more documents. So a few that I always like to point out to new users: recently opened, probably the most common, right? Recently opened will give you just that list of what have I been working on lately, right? So probably one of the most common filters, one of the most useful. You also have My Documents, of course, documents that are owned by you, created by you, shared with you, all examples, filters that can be useful for different searches through the document list. We also have the concept of companies in Onshape, so a company-owned document, and company admins control the permissions and so on. So you can have companies, you can even have teams within the company, right? So you can have multiple teams and share with teams at once. That's also a separate filter here. But I think the most important for new users getting started are the two at the bottom: public and tutorials and samples. And as I mentioned before, when you're first getting started, there's lots of resources. This is one of them to learn how to use Onshape. Public and tutorials and samples are good resources for that. So if you click public, you'll see just a list of documents that others have shared publicly. So this is documents that others have decided I want to share with the world. And in many situations, they're valuable learning tools if you're the type that likes to learn from others. For instance, here's a design of a pneumatic cylinder, right, that you can see from scratch. It's all of the sketches and features and so on. So great learning resource, just a large library of publicly available models that, again, have, in many situations, all of that geometric data embedded in them. You can actually see how they were modeled. Now, some of these are imports, of course, but many of them are actually modeled in Onshape, and they can be a valuable tool when you're learning. Now, the other resource that I would point out are the tutorials and samples as you're getting started. Tutorials and samples are just a good way to learn a little bit more step by step, right? Not just looking through models, but actually with videos and example models and things that you could do a little bit more structured, I would say. So again, public, tutorials, and samples, both valuable resources as you're learning, just getting started. The other thing I would mention is don't forget from time to time to empty your trash. It sounds like a simple enough thing, but it's very easy to forget. You'll see the trash here on the left side. All right, so that is the filters on the left. Of course, you have a search, right? So I can just do a simple text search. If I hit the drop down, I can do all kinds of advanced search functions: search by description, part number, state, any of those types of things. So as we get into more complex designs where I'm associating metadata and I have revisions and all these types of things, you can search by all of that, right? So you'll see advanced search in the drop down, but otherwise just a simple text search, right? You can search for your document based on the text. Now, one thing I always like to mention to new users, because it's just a commonly asked question, is what about CAM? What about simulation? What about rendering? What do I do for these kinds of apps? You'll see many apps available in the Onshape App Store. So in the top right corner of your document, there's a big button that says App Store. If you click that, it will take you to the Onshape App Store. Apps for CAM, apps for rendering, apps for simulation. So if you're looking for a specific app to do a specific thing, definitely come here first. A lot of very good apps and integrated with Onshape. So that is the Onshape App Store. Again, you'll find it in the top right. I'm going to skip share for now, just because I'll show that in a bit. But I do want to mention two important things in the top right here. First is the help menu. As you're getting started, help is going to be a valuable resource. We have a very thorough, very good help. Every new feature that's added gets documented in the help. So if you're looking for, what does this command do? What do I need to click on? What is this called? Those types of things. Help is a very valuable resource for that. The other things under this list: videos, tutorials, right? There's links to both. Feature script documentation if you're interested in creating a custom feature. One of the more common questions, though, is keyboard shortcuts. Where do I find keyboard shortcuts? You'll find them under the help menu. If you left click, you'll see all the keyboard shortcuts that we have available. You can even pop this out into a separate tab and even print it, or just have it up on a separate monitor if you chose to. But this is your list of keyboard shortcuts. Again, you'll find that under the help. There's also links to forums, feedback, very valuable tools for getting questions answered. Right, the forums is a valuable place to get questions answered by the Onshape community, and feedback's a good way to give us feedback about Onshape. So under the help menu, a lot of valuable resources. The other thing that I wanted to mention is under your account settings. As you're getting started, you may come from another CAD software. Maybe you don't care for a certain way something behaves. A lot of things can be changed under the account settings. So as you're getting started, one of the places I would go just to look through the options is under your account. So if I left click your account, you'll see Manage Account. If you go to Preferences, you'll see a lot of specific settings that you may want to change. For instance, default units are inch. If I use metric units, that's one of the first things I'll change. Right? So this ensures that all documents going forward have this style of units. So changing your default units, changing the decimal places for your units. Also, how you manipulate the model, rotate, pan, and zoom can be changed. You can even map them to other CAD applications. So if you're coming from SolidWorks, if you're coming from NX or Creo or AutoCAD, there's a specific map that will make Onshape more comfortable for you. Just meant to make it easy to bring on, to learn Onshape, and also to work between different applications. So the big things are, if you change it to SolidWorks, you're going to get similar rotate, pan, and zoom settings that you had in SolidWorks. Right? It's going to be a bit different than the default Onshape, but it will be comfortable for you. Right? Same thing goes for NX, Creo, AutoCAD. If you've come from any of these applications and you're familiar with their style of zoom, pan, rotate, then you can switch. Right? The other one that's commonly asked, can we reverse the scroll wheel? Yes, there's a separate checkbox for that. But those are examples of some options. The shortcut toolbars you can customize, all of that stuff might be worth checking into as you're getting started, just to make it easier to transition. All right, so let's move on. Now, the thing that I wanted to get into next, enough on the documents page. What I want to do is open up a document and start working in it. Now, you may have noticed I have several tabs open here, and one of them is already a document open. If I left click that tab, you can see I already have the bike frame open. Now, the thing I want to show here is mainly that you can have as many Onshape tabs open as you would like. You can move tabs to multiple monitors. You can do all of that, and it's kind of a byproduct of running in the browser. It's a nice addition to running in a browser. You get all of those browser benefits. I can drag tabs and move them around and do all those things. But you can have as many Onshape tabs open as you'd like. You can have a part and drawing open, or a part and assembly, and watch things live update. So you can move things around and do anything you'd like in terms of that. All right, so now that we're in a document, there are some important pieces of the interface that I want to go over before we start modeling. The first, the document toolbar across the very top. And I'm going to start at the top left corner. If I left click the Onshape logo, it closes the document and takes me back to the documents page. So if you're looking for an easy way to close the document and go back to documents page, just click that Onshape logo. Now, next to that is the document menu. Document menu has options like rename, what are the properties, right? I mentioned before, revision, state, part number, those types of things. You'll find those under properties, changing the units, copy, so on. Next to that is manage versions and history. And one thing I want to point out is you'll notice nowhere in Onshape is there a save. You don't have to save in Onshape, and that's because everything is saved for you. So if I expand out my history, you can see every little thing that's done to this document is automatically saved. It's automatically stored. And the neat thing about this is I can go to any point in here and say, let's restore to this point. So you can think of Onshape as having this infinite history of your document, and you could go back to any point in that history and restore. Think of it like an infinite undo. So again, you never have to worry about saving. Everything you do is automatically saved, and you can see everything done in this history, even restore to it. Now, I also mentioned before that you can create versions, capture milestones in the design, whether that be revisions or just moments that you want to be able to go back to easily. There's an option to create a version. I mentioned before the built-in version control. This is one element of that. So you'll see create version here. You can create that snapshot of the document, that moment in time that you can always go back and review. So that's create version. I mentioned before, we're going to skip by share. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. And I'm also going to skip comments, although these are very cool details. I do want to get to them, but we will in just a bit. So moving on, the next important piece of the interface, of course, is the toolbar. Now, this toolbar that you're seeing here, just below the document toolbar, is essentially it's a changing toolbar depending on what you're doing at that time. So I'm in an assembly. So I see assembly tools. I see the ability to insert parts in assemblies. I see the ability to add mates and define motion with different relations. So this list of tools that I'm seeing is because I'm currently in an assembly. If I go to a part, if I go to a drawing, you're going to see these icons change. Okay? And I'm going to get into as many of those as I can in the time that we have, but just realize this is where all the tools are, and those tools will change depending on what you're doing. Whether that's sketching, creating features, creating assemblies, creating drawings, you're going to see different icons there. So that's the toolbar. The next bit of the interface is, in this case, the instance list, the list of all the parts in my assembly. Now, if you've come from other CAD systems, this is a familiar concept. I've heard the term feature tree or feature list, or there's long list. Timeline is another good example of it, where it's essentially just a list of all the things that it took to build that CAD model that you're looking at. Now, this is an assembly, so I see parts and mates, right? All the inserting of parts and all the mates to define the motion between those parts. But in a part studio, we would see sketches and features. Right? So I would see sketches and extrudes, revolves, or sweeps, or lofts. So whatever it is that I'm using to build that part. But again, realize the instance list or the feature list, it is here on the left side of the screen by default. By the way, a commonly asked question, can you move these? I can grab and drag and move this instance list around if I chose to. Now, the next bit of the interface that I want to focus on is the tabs across the bottom. I mentioned this early on. One document can hold anything project related. So this document is my bike. I'm designing a bike frame, right? So of course, a bike frame has more than one part. It has assemblies, it has drawings, it has all these other bits of information. And this is how we access those various bits of information. You can see the tabs across the bottom. So I have the bike frame assembly, but if I left click the next tab, you can see the fox shop, right? If I left click the next tab, we have the dog bone link. So these are all parts of that bike frame assembly, different pieces of it. So again, you'll have tabs for assemblies, tabs for parts, tabs for drawings, tabs for imported geometry. I mentioned before that you can import models from other CAD systems. This is a swing arm designed in SolidWorks, imported into the document, and used in that assembly that you saw a moment ago, right? So again, you can work with imported data. You can import and store that data in a tab in your document, even version control it if you choose to. You can even store miscellaneous files, things like PDFs or spreadsheets or G-code or whatever it is that you want to store within the document may be valuable coming back to this information later. So again, the thing I want to stress here is just that you have the ability to store anything you'd like in a document, and you'll see all the pieces of that in tabs in the document. You can even create folders and subfolders and store all the tabs in that organized manner, very similar to how you would in Windows Explorer, for example, where I'm creating folders and subfolders to organize my data, based on how I like to see it. So that is the tabs across the bottom, a very important piece of the interface. The last bit of the interface I want to mention is just the view tools. You'll see them in the top right here. I can left-click standard views if I choose to. I can left-click arrows and rotate around axes. Okay. And in the view tools dropdown, I can choose options like isometric view or hidden edges visible or turn on section view. Another commonly asked question, how do I do a section view? You'll find it here. So hidden edges visible, hidden edges removed, translucent, all kinds of different render modes that you can choose from. And again, your standard views here as well. So those are the key pieces of the interface that I wanted to focus on. Now I want to get into some real part modeling. And what I'd like to do is walk you through an example of building something similar to this dog bone link that we're looking at here. And what I want to do is, once that's done, I want to assemble it into the bike frame assembly we were looking at a moment ago. And then I want to create a drawing of that dog bone link. So we're going to, at a very fast rate, walk through kind of a day in the life of an Onshape engineer, creating features, creating parts, creating assemblies, and of course, creating a drawing. All right, so let's get started. Now, this dog bone link is already finished, so we're going to start a new blank part in our document. Now, as I mentioned before, you can have as many parts, as many assemblies or drawings as you'd like. So I'm going to create a new tab, a new part in my document. To do this, I'm going to left-click the plus icon in the bottom left corner and choose Create Part Studio. That will give me a new blank part in my document. You can see a new tab has been added, Part Studio 1, in my document. Now I'm ready to start sketching. Now, I wanted to create that dog bone link shape, and I'm going to start with the two holes in it. So we're going to start a sketch on the front plane. Now, you can pre-select an Onshape. I can left-click the plane and say, this is where I want to start a sketch. Or I can click Sketch, and then it will ask me, what plane do you want to start on? But again, it's important when you're starting to define, where am I sketching? And in my case, I want to start on the front plane. So I'll left-click there first, then click Sketch. Now I'm in a sketch on that front plane. Notice a few things. First off, the toolbar has changed. Right? So no longer are we looking at assembly tools or part modeling tools. We're looking at sketch tools, right? Lines, rectangles, circles, the things we'd expect to see in the sketch toolbar. The other thing to notice is there's a new dialog here indicating that you're in a sketch. You can see sketch 1, the plane that it's on, and a few options. Now, the next step is really important. I've started a sketch, but I'm still not normal to the sketch plane. And that's a commonly asked question, a point where a lot of new users get hung up is, how do I go normal to the sketch plane? You have a couple options, but I do want to point out one very big piece of the interface that I think every new user should know, and that is the right-click menu. You can right-click on anything in Onshape, and you're going to get a context-sensitive list of options. So you're going to see, if I right-click while in a sketch in the graphics, you're going to see options like copy the sketch or view normal to sketch plane. But again, this isn't specific to sketching. You'll see this throughout Onshape. And one big tip that I would give any new user is try right-clicking. If you want to know, how do I change this feature? Well, right-click a face associated with the feature, and you should see an option to edit or delete. Right? Right-click a sketch in the feature list, and you'll have options to edit or delete. So again, the right-click menu option is a huge part of the Onshape interface, and it's something that I can't stress enough when you're getting started. Right-click menu is going to be where you find a lot of valuable commands, especially when it relates to certain features, certain parts, whatever it may be. All right, so now we've started our sketch on the front plane. We've gone normal to the front plane, right, with the right-click menu. And by the way, you can also use the N key on the keyboard to do that. And now we're ready to start sketching. And as I mentioned before, I want to start with the two holes, the two circles in the shape. So I'm going to start with the center point circle command. Just left click it in the toolbar, and as I move my cursor around, you're going to see visual references, little cues that you're creating a relationship to the origin, right? So you can see as I move my mouse, it kind of snaps to these points and lets me know, hey, this is vertical of the origin, this is horizontal of the origin. Now I want to start my circle right on the origin, so I'm going to move my cursor over it, and you'll actually see a little flag appear indicating you're creating a coincident constraint. Right? So the big thing I want to say is, if you've come from other CAD systems where a lot of constraints are created automatically, kind of snapped into place as you're sketching, Onshape is very similar in that sense. Right? You just mouse over geometry, left click, and now I've created a constraint. Right? Move my circle out, left click, now I have my circle. So just two left clicks. Left click first to define the center point of your circle. Left click a second time to define the size. And there we have our first circle. Now I want one more to the right of this one. So I'm going to move my cursor up. And you'll notice as I hit a certain point, I get that again, that visual reference. This is horizontal to the origin. Again, left click, left click, and now I have 2 circles in my sketch. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, as we're doing this, you're going to get that visual feedback that something's changing, right? That you're constraining the sketch. So just keep in mind, a lot of the constraints that you create in Onshape are automatic. You don't need to do anything yourself, right? Now, I'm going to get into in a second where you do need to create from time to time a constraint, but oftentimes they're automatic. Now, the next natural question is, well, how do I add dimensions? I don't know what the size of those 2 circles are. How do I add the dimensions for them? And the answer to that is the dimension command in the toolbar. So I left-click dimension. I'll left-click one of the circles, left-click to place it, and then enter the value. In this case, should be 25 millimeters. Now, you'll notice the entire sketch scales to match that first dimension. So in this case, I need to zoom in a bit because I had a very large circle and I dimensioned it to a relatively small value. So now we've added the first dimension, and what you'll notice is the circle on the left is black, the circle on the right is blue, and that's the visual cue as to the level of definition of your sketch. The circle on the left is fully defined, the circle on the right is underdefined. Your goal with the sketch should be to have a fully defined sketch, right? So your goal should be to have a sketch that's entirely black. There are some rare exceptions, but for the most part, that's just a best practice when we talk about parametric CAD. So we have the circle on the left fully defined, but I haven't added a dimension to the circle on the right. So let's do that. Add a dimension, just left-click the circle, left-click to place the dimension, and enter a value. In this case, 20, enter, and now we've defined the diameter of the circle on the right. But notice it's still not fully defined. One easy way to see how it's under constraint, what the issue is to left-click and drag. If you left-click the geometry and drag, something will change and you'll get a cue. Okay, I know there's no distance defined between this circle and this one. Because I'm able to drag it left to right. I shouldn't be able to do that, right? So now I can add another dimension to define the distance between those two. Left-click, move my cursor down, left-click, and enter a value, in this case, 85. So now we have 2 fully defined circles. Now, what I'd like to do next is draw a construction line that joins them. So I'll select the line command from the toolbar, then choose construction, the icon on the toolbar here, then just left-click, and there is a construction line. Now, for those not familiar, construction line just means it will be ignored when we go to create a feature. It's just there to help us construct the sketch. Now, the reason I want a construction line right between these 2 circles is I want to draw a line that joins the 2 circles and then mirror that line to the bottom side. So let's do that. Let's sketch a line. Again, select line from the toolbar. Mouse over the circle. Again, notice it highlights. Another visual cue that you're attaching geometry. It's snapping to that geometry. Left-click, and now I've created a line that's attached to both circles and is horizontal. Now what I want to do is I want to take this line and mirror it to the bottom side. And of course, to mirror, we need a line to mirror about, and that's why we started with that construction line. So now we can choose the mirror command in the toolbar, left-click the line, left-click any entities that we want to mirror, in this case just this single line, and it mirrors it to the other side. Now you may ask yourself, well, why wouldn't you just sketch another line? And you could. The neat thing about the mirror is you get that symmetric relationship very easily, right? So I can just left-click and drag these, and you can see it stays centered over that construction line. All right, so now we can add a dimension. In this case, 16. And we're back to a fully defined sketch. Now we have one last thing that I want to do this sketch before we move on, and that's just draw 2 more simple circles on the inside. So I'll select circle. Again, I'm going to place this circle right on the same point that we placed the first circle. So I'm just looking for that reference saying, hey, you're attaching to this point. You can see it there. Left-click, 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 left-click. right? So I've placed 2 more circles at the center of the 2 previous circles. Now, up to this point, everything that we've done in this sketch has been automatically constrained. You didn't see me creating manually any constraints. You can see all of these constraints if you check Show Constraints. So there's a little checkbox here. If you check that, it will turn on all the little flags for the constraints in your sketch. And you can see all of these were created automatically, just from me snapping to things as I was sketching. But there will be times when you need to create constraints manually, and I want to walk through that process. Now, it's very simple, but there will come a time when you need to say, I want this tangent to that, or this concentric with that, or this equal to that. Things that you may not necessarily get automatically. One good example of this is the 2 circles I just sketched. I want those 2 circles to have the same diameter, right? When I change the diameter of one, it does not change the other. I need these 2 to have the same diameter. Now, I could, of course, dimension them both separately and just give them the same value, but it's not really what I would consider a best practice. What you would do is you would give them an equal constraint. So I would apply an equal constraint to them. Now, applying any constraint, whether it's tangent, concentric, coincident, parallel, perpendicular, any constraint, the process is the same. You left-click the geometry that you want to constrain, select the constraint from the toolbar. So I want to make this circle equal to this circle. Left-click, choose equal from the drop-down, right? In this case, right here, you'll see equal. So that's it. And it doesn't matter what the constraint is, coincident, concentric, parallel, tangent, you left-click the geometry, left-click the constraint. There's no keyboard shortcuts or, there's no shift or control that you have to hold down. Just left-click geometry, left-click the constraint from the toolbar. Now, if I change the diameter of one of these circles, they both change, right? And that also means that I only need to dimension one of them. So let's add a dimension, give it a value of 12, and again, we're back to a fully defined sketch. All right, so now we're ready to extrude. So I've finished this sketch, and I'm ready to take this and turn it into a 3D model. And one important thing I want to stress, especially if you've come from a SolidWorks or Inventor or Creo or CATIA, one of those types of CAD applications, is you don't have to be overly concerned in Onshape about trimming out sketch entities. And what I mean by that is in other applications, you may be forced to trim out these inside pieces of the geometry in order to extrude it and create a feature out of it. That is not the case in Onshape. So I can leave these in place, go straight to the extrude command. It's intelligent enough to know that I'm going to extrude the entire shape at once. Now you have that option. You can go in and choose pieces of the sketch to extrude, but when I choose the sketch by default, it's going to grab everything in it, even overlapping geometry like this. So just keep in mind, you're not forced to trim a lot in Onshape. Trimming is more for just cleanliness sake. I don't want to see all this excess stuff, and it's just visually bothering me. But it's not a requirement of Onshape itself, right? You don't have to trim entities just to use them. So that's one thing I want to stress. Now, of course, now that we're in the extrude command, it's pretty straightforward. If you've come from other CAD applications, I'm sure a lot of this is going to look familiar. So we have things like in types, a familiar concept, blind in type, up to face, up to next, up to part, through all. These are very familiar concepts in 3D CAD. Symmetric, very common, or very much the equivalent of mid-plane in SolidWorks, right? So these are very similar options to what you may have seen in the past. It's pretty straightforward. You have what direction, what's the in type. You can flip the direction with opposite direction. You enter the depth of the extrusion. In this case, you can add draft. You can extrude in 2 different directions if you want to, with a second in position. But very straightforward in terms of creating a new extrude. One thing I want to point out is you can grab the manipulator and drag it, and it will dynamically resize the extrude. And again, this is pretty impressive considering the fact that this is all done in a browser, right? I'm communicating with servers, not even in my state in the US. So very neat stuff. Again, the manipulator is just an easy way to kind of dynamically grab and drag and see what it looks like. All right, so that is the extrude. I want a depth of 25. I'm going to hit the green check, and now I've accepted my first feature. Now, a commonly asked question, how do I hide the planes? If you use the P key on the keyboard, that's hide and show planes. That's one that I think new users really like learning. So P key will hide and show the planes. Now, if we start to look through our feature list, you'll see the features that created this geometry, right? The first two things we did, create a sketch, then extrude that sketch. And you'll see those listed in your feature list. If you want to edit them, change them, delete them, you'll find that those options in the right-click menu. So you'll see if I right-click all the options, delete, roll to, view normal to, export as DWG, all kinds of different things that you'll find in that right-click menu. All right, so moving on. Now, the next thing that I wanted to mention, we're going to do this one more time, is just the ability to do all kinds of neat things when we talk about modeling techniques. Let me give you an example of this. Onshape's Part Studio is really unique. It's, of course, where you're going to do your part modeling. So, all of this sketching and feature creation that you see me doing now, that's all done in the Part Studio. But it really allows you to do some unique things, especially when we start talking about multi-parts, right? The ability to reference multiple parts together. And it's a bit of an advanced concept, but I do want to just briefly mention it here. So as I'm sketching, you can see I'm just adding simple dimensions to drive these 3 lines that I've sketched. Right. Notice I'm not using any special tools for angle dimensions, for example. So I can choose 170 there just by left-clicking 2 lines that aren't parallel. It knows I need to add an angle dimension. And what I'd like to do here is take these 3 lines that I've sketched and offset them. Offset all 3 of them at once. And Onshape, of course, can do that. I have the offset command here. And I just left-click drag any one piece of this geometry and will automatically grab everything attached to it. So if you're trying to offset dozens of lines and arcs at once, just left-click drag one piece of that chain of sketch entities and will automatically grab everything in it. Right? So in this case, you can see as I offset, I'll left-click, enter a value for my offset, in this case 8. Now I have an offset of those 3 lines. The thing I want to do next, of course, close these ends up. And what I want to do is attach these ends to the edges of the model. Now, again, if you've come from other CAD systems, you may be familiar with the concept of converting entities or using or projecting sketch entities or geometry into the current sketch. Onshape also has a similar concept, and we call the command use. So you'll find the use command in the toolbar, and simply put, it allows you to use past geometry, whether that geometry be sketch models, faces, edges, past sketches that you want to reference in the current sketch. And all you need to do is select use, and then select an edge, face, sketch geometry, whatever it is that you want to convert, and left-click it. What will happen is it will convert that entity, that face, that edge, whatever it was, into sketch geometry. So if we look closely, I converted the silhouette edges of this radius into an actual line that I can reference in my sketch. Right? So it's easy for me to constrain these two and finish my sketch up. Now, what I need to do next is create another feature. And I mentioned earlier, Onshape has really robust tools when we talk about modeling multiple parts. And you'll really see that when I go to create this second feature. When I click extrude, right, just as we did a moment ago, I finish my sketch. I click extrude to create my second extrude feature in this part. What I didn't mention earlier was the options at the top here. These are what we refer to as Boolean options. And you can see by default, it assumes that I want to extrude this sketch that I've created and merge it with the past part, right? But what if I don't want to do that? What if I want to create a cut out of this sketch? And one of the commonly asked questions we get is, where's the cut command in Onshape? In Onshape, it's all an option within that command. So you'll see an option for remove. right? So there's not a separate button for extruded cut. You go to extrude and choose the option to remove. That will give you your cut. So by default, it assumed I wanted to add geometry or merge it with the current part, but I say, no, I want to create a cut here by clicking remove. Now, I mentioned the idea of modeling multiple parts together. You can even create new parts within this same part studio. And this becomes really relevant when we start talking about more complex designs where I need to model multiple parts with relationships to each other. Think about if you were designing like a suspension, where there's so many pieces that work together that it's really advantageous to model them together, right? Rather than independently and taking a lot of measurements. So in Onshape, we have the concept of multi-part modeling. We covered that in more advanced webinars and courses, but just keep in mind it's very easy to do. And one key bit of it is this option for creating new parts in the Part Studio. Now, one option that I haven't discussed is intersect. And intersect will give you only what's shared between the two features. So in this case, between my feature and this part defined in my merge scope. So it gives me only what's intersecting between those two things. And you can see in this case, it gives me that bent dog bone link shape that we see. All right, so that is my second sketch, second extrude. And you'll see them again in the feature list. Sketch 1, extrude 1, sketch 2, extrude 2. Again, if you need to make a change, you need to edit a feature, edit a sketch, delete, whatever it may be, right-click on those in the feature list. All right, so pretty straightforward. If you have experience with CAD, sketches and extrudes are certainly not a new concept. Of course, running this in a browser is, but there's a lot of things that really gives us the advantage of. A lot of things in Onshape are meant to be simple and easy to adopt for other, users of other CAD applications. So sketches and features, of course, are very easy to use, very easy to adopt if you've come from something that's very similar. But there are a lot of things that are dramatically different. As I mentioned before, there's no save. You never saw me hit save anywhere in this, 45-minute presentation, and that's because there's no need to. Right? If this computer blows up, I jump on another computer, and I haven't lost a moment of work. So it's an important thing to stress is, because we're running the browser, there's never any need to worry about files or crashing or any of those types of things. But also one other big benefit of it is just the ability to collaborate with others. The reason I bring this up is this is something that really no other CAD system in the world can do, and that is the ability to collaborate in real time with anyone else, right? So if I click the share icon in the top right corner, big blue share button in the top right corner, all I need to do is enter their email address, right, and define their permissions. So by default, anything you create in Onshape is private. But if you decide to share with someone, you have very specific control over what they can do. So I can say, no, you're only allowed to view, you can't comment, can't copy, can't export, and I'm giving someone just a look at my model, right? They can't do anything with it. And this is something that, if you're used to emailing CAD files, you'll know the moment you email a CAD file, you're just hoping that it doesn't get distributed in some way that you don't want. In Onshape, we control that. We can say you can view, but you're not allowed to copy, right? That's something that you don't get when you email a file. So again, you get really granular control. I can say view, you're allowed to comment, and maybe I'll allow you to export, right? I have that independent checkboxes here. Now, if I'm working with someone else and they need to be able to edit the model, we want to work together in real time, that's of course can edit permission. But I still have the control to say, no, you can't export. No, you're not allowed to also share it or copy it. So again, I remain in control of the data even when I've shared it. Now, in this case, it's very easy for me to say, okay, let's share this with this person, right? Just define their permissions, click share. They don't need to download or install anything. They literally left-click a link in an email, and they're taken to the exact model you're in. Now, this is not like any other CAD system. In any other CAD system, you would be sending files back and forth. Even in complex implementations of PDM systems, it's still a process of sending files back and forth. In Onshape, you're working on the same set of data. You're looking at the same set of data in real time. That means that if people decide to make changes, let's say that you've shared your document with another engineer and they come in and they decide to make a change to the document, you will instantly see it update, right? So the moment that the person I've shared this with decides to change the color, I instantly see it update. The moment they decide to add a new feature, I see a little visual cue, hey, someone's adding a feature, right? The moment they click OK to that feature, I'm going to see it added to my list. So this is what I mean by real-time collaboration. You're not working on sets, files of different copies of files. You're working on the same set of data at the same time. So you can see the color's been changed and a fillet was created, and clearly I didn't do either of those things, right? That's the person that I've shared this with. We're working together on the same model. Now, it may mean that, we're working together on the same part like we are here, but more realistically, you might work on, one big assembly where maybe I have a 100-part assembly and I don't want to put it together myself. I can say, hey, you work on this piece or this half, I'll work on this half, and just work in the same space. So you can break up tasks and work on them in a more parallel fashion than you can with files, because the problem with files, of course, only one person can edit a file at a time. Now, real-time collaboration is certainly one element of this, one very important element of this. But we also have built-in tools to try and make this faster. So, for instance, let's say that I need to communicate with the person that's in the document. Let's say that I don't know if this hole diameter is right, and I want to ask the person that's in the document at the moment. I can right-click that face or that feature or whatever it may be, and you'll see an option to add a comment. And I can just add a comment and say, is this diameter right? And I can even tag them at C. Armstrong, right? So I can even tag a person with a comment so that they get a specific email, saying, hey, this is directed to you. And then all I need to do is click add, and what will happen is they will see a little notification. They will also get an email saying, hey, you've been tagged in a comment in an Onshape document. Not only will they see that, but they will also see the face that was tagged with the comment. And when they left click the comment, let's go back to it. Let's say that the person that's in the document is looking at it like this, and they're not sure, what diameter you're talking about. They can left click the tag in the comment. It will show them the face, and it will take them to the same orientation that the comment was created in. So you get a very clear idea of what the person was thinking about, what they were looking at when they created that comment. So it's just adding that layer of collaboration to Onshape that means that you don't have to do, the emails with screenshots that are marked up and send them back and forth. All of that can be done right inside of Onshape. So that's collaboration. That's commenting in the collaboration process. One last thing I want to mention, if you double click this social cue, the indication that they're in the document, if you double click this, it will take you into what we call follow mode. And this just means that you're looking at their screen in real time. So it's another, kind of layer. Maybe I'm in a conference call or video call, and, I need to, point out this is the fillet that I'm having a problem with. I could do follow mode, look at their screen in real time and see, okay, this is the problem, or no, this is the hole that I'm referring to. So it's just allowing me to communicate a little bit better, and again, all built right into the document. All right, so those are some of the collaborative benefits. Again, this all kind of stems from sharing your document. So if you haven't already, definitely share a document with someone, give it a shot. You can work together in real time. You can build, big assemblies together if you choose to, or you can get feedback on parts and use it as a tool for that. So all kinds of different examples where this is useful. Now, one last question that I often get is, well, if multiple people are in my document, how do I know who did what, and what if I don't like it, and what if I'm not comfortable with just letting anyone change my document? Remember, in Onshape, everything we do is saved. So if I go back to the history, I can see this person created this fillet at this time. I can see every little change anyone made, not just me, but anyone in the document. I can see who did it and when, and of course I can go back and restore to any point. So if you share a document, they make some changes you don't care for, just restore to a point before that, right? So you still have the utmost control. Again, anything made in any change made to the document by you or anyone else is automatically tracked in the history. There's no need to save for anyone. All right, so that is the collaboration in Onshape, and a bit on the part modeling as well, right? Building a simple feature in Sketch. What I'd like to do next is walk through the assembly process in Onshape. We only have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to go through this at kind of a quick speed here. But again, feel free to ask any questions in the questions dialog in the GoToWebinar control panel, and I'll make sure to address them. What I'd like to do here is walk through real quickly an intro into our assemblies. And of course, the first part to building your assemblies is inserting the parts. And you can see I've got quite a few already here. What I would like to do is insert that dog bone link and mate it into place in our suspension. So I'm going to select Insert. I'm going to browse to the dog bone link, and then just left click out here in space to place it. Right? Hit the green check. Now I've inserted my part into my assembly. However, you can see it's not constrained in any way. If I left-click drag the part, you can see it's free to move in any direction, right? You can rotate it, you can move it any way you want, and that's the way parts are by default. They're under constraint. I need to define how this attaches to the bike. Now, we do this with, of course, mates, but if you've come from other CAD systems, our mates are a bit different. Don't think of it as a combination of faces. Think of it as attachment points, and you're defining attachment points between parts. So let me give you an example. Let's say that I wanted to create a Revolute mate that attaches this link to the frame here. I would choose Revolute from the toolbar, left-click the point where I want to attach this part to the frame. You can see the center of this circle is that point that I want to reference. So I left-click that point. We refer to these as mate connectors, right? And once you do that, you've defined this is my attachment point for this part, right? Then you go to another point that you want to attach that point to, that mate connector to. So as I move my part around, you can see as I mouse over the hole in the frame where this attaches, I also have a point here. So I left click, that creates the mate connection points on two parts and brings them together. So again, don't think of this as a combination of faces. If you've come from a SolidWorks or Inventor or one of those, you might use 2 or 3 mates to do this one step. In Onshape, you can do this in a single step using your mate connectors. Right? So think of mating a bolt to a hole. In other CAD systems, you may use 3 mates to do that. In Onshape, that would be 1 fastened mate. All right, so let's do this one more time. We'll do a cylindrical mate to attach the other end of the dog bone link to the other end of the suspension. Now we have both ends of the link arm constrained, and the ultimate test, of course, is to grab that suspension or that swing arm and move it around, make sure that it travels in a way that I'd expect, right? So that's a quick, very fast intro into Onshape assemblies. One question that comes up or has come up is Onshape suitable for architectural use, terrain modeling? It's not built for that, no. I think there are a lot of other applications that are better suited for that type of modeling. I'm sure there are those out there using Onshape for that, but Onshape itself is a mechanical CAD application. It's built for the type of work you're seeing here, not architectural. All right, so that is a simple intro into the assemblies. I'm going to give you a quick crash course into the drawings, and we'll wrap things up. Now, I mentioned before, you have tabs for assemblies, like here, right? I have all my assembly tools. I have tabs for the parts, right? Like the part we modeled a moment ago. We also have tabs for drawings. I'm going to create a new drawing in this document. Again, go to that same plus icon, create drawing, choose my template, right? In this case, we'll just choose a standard ISO template. And now I'm free to start inserting views and adding all of my details to my drawings, right? So front view, we can project a top view, maybe project a right view, maybe even an isometric view. Maybe I want to make it color, shaded view. Maybe I want a detail view. I'm not going to go, obviously, all through detailing this drawing out, but I think you get the idea, right? So lay out all my views, add all my dimensions, constraints, fill out my title block. You can even link these things to properties of the document, even speeding up that process of automatically populating title blocks and so on. So lots of very cool stuff. I know I've run out of time to cover drawings, but keep in mind, if you're interested in drawings specifically, we've done webinars in the past on them and how to handle them. So definitely check that out. I am officially out of time. That is what I had planned for you. So I want to say thank you, everyone, for coming. I will stick around and answer any questions that you have. But that's it, everyone. Thank you, and have a good day.